and welcome to another edition of the Sports Pro podcast. I am your host again, Tom Bassam. This week, we're going to be talking all about AI. This is a massively popular and huge subject of interest, not just in the sports industry, but also in wider society right now too. And it probably will be for many years to come. Now, when we're talking about AI, I think we are right at the start of this journey and understanding what the technology can do and what its applications are. And for the sports industry, where does it help? Where does it hinder? What are the dangers? And ultimately, who's going to make the best use of it? There's a few companies in the sports industry that are doing interesting stuff with AI and generative AI especially. One of those is Relative Insight. Relative Insight are a data analysis company that use artificial intelligence in order to help businesses understand more about themselves and their customers. And they're really at the forefront of some of the technology in this space. I was lucky enough to speak to Rauri Hadlington, who's a business development director at Relative Insight, to kind of get a better understanding of what it is and how it is that AI is being used in that field right now, some of the flaws around those applications, and like what are the sort of implications here for sports and the teams that are best using this in the industry. That's probably enough for me. Let's hand over to my conversation with Rauri. Right, Rauri Hadlington, welcome to the Sports Pro podcast. Maybe if you could just start actually by telling us a little bit about yourself and Relative Insight, the company that you work for.
So I'm Rauri. Interestingly enough, background in healthcare. So I was a physiotherapist for about 15 years before making the transition over to work with Relative Insight, where I've been now for, coming up on about 4 years. Originally there on the customer side, where I worked with a number of our customers to help them get more value out of their unstructured text data, which is what we do. I worked with teams like the Atlanta Falcons and Formula One, as well as a few other kind of sports customers. And now over on the business development side, sort of helping to share, I guess, Relative Insight with some new people. And as I say, Relative is a text analytics and visualization platform. We use a unique blend of AI and NLP and comparative linguistics to help people get more value out of predominantly survey open ends, but also any other type of unstructured text, whether that is social listening, reviews, and so on and so forth.
That's probably where I wanted to start this conversation actually. So is how currently sports organisations are using that text data, for example, fan experience surveys. What is it that they're currently doing and how does that work and what's the processes in sports organisations?
Yeah. So I think you're right to say that fan experience, that's the biggest area where we're seeing teams want to get the most out of their text data. And I guess if you take it right back, increasingly fan experience is really, really important to sports teams for a whole host of different reasons. But as a result, most, if not all, sports organizations that I speak to will be running some kind of fan experience tracker, generally in the form of a survey. You know, you come along to a game or an event and you respond to a survey, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 5, how much did you enjoy your time, rating different areas of it, whether that's sort of entrance, egress, concession stands, food offerings, and so on and so forth. And it's really easy to track that number, right? Over time, it's very easy to say, okay, well, our fan experience is getting better or getting worse or staying the same, or our food offering is bad. Invariably on that survey, there's also an open end. So there's a response to say, okay, tell us why. That why holds an incredible amount of valuable data, which underpins what's going on with those scores. And so the question that will often be asked of a data analytics team or a business intelligence team is, hey, our fan experience is 2 points lower than it was last year or last week. Why? And invariably, as I say, the answer is in that open end, but it's very, very difficult to get out just because of the nature of unstructured text. And so sports teams increasingly are wanting to leverage that data in order to understand what it is that their fans are saying.
And how is it that they're doing that? Sort of strikes me that like AI text language analysis tools might be something that they turn to.
Yeah, for sure. Relative Insight's been around for a long while. We've kind of seen this whole rise of generative AI, OpenAI, ChatGPT, whatever it is, sort of coming through. And you're quite right. There are kind of 4 things that people could do with those open ends. The first, honestly, is nothing. And you'd be amazed the number of people that just sort of stick them in the bin and don't do anything with them because of the challenges that they run with them. Even to the extent of when they get asked that why question, they'll go off and do different types of research to try and answer the question, but they're just not doing anything with the open ends. The other is, as you say, right, to run them through some kind of ChatGPT AI and get a summary to tell them, perhaps what's going on within the data. But there are obviously going to be challenges within that, largely that generative AI, large language models are a bit of a closed box. So you put that data in and you'll get that summary back, but you're not really sure how it's been reached. And so if any further scrutiny is needed, if somebody comes back and says, okay, well, tell me why that's an issue. Tell me why this problem is. What is it about parking that's putting fans off? Unless it happens to have come through that summary, there's no way to go back and recheck that in a sort of robust and auditable and traceable way. And then on top of that, you've got some sort of data security issues with how the data is being handled, which nobody's really fully sure on. The third thing, obviously, is there are lots of very, very good data scientists and data analytics people who will either manually read through to try and pull out key things, or there's the classic Excel and Control F, try and find some key themes within that. There's some standard models that you can run around, like sentiment analysis and frequency-based analysis, all of which are flawed for various reasons, because it's quite time consuming. You need to know what you're looking for. It's very hard to sort of discover in that way. You need to know what you're looking for. There's bias involved in sort of just humans reading those sorts of things and so on. And then the fourth, unsurprisingly, is using, in our opinion, some kind of advanced text analytics tool like Relative Insight to really deep dive into that data and understand it in a lot of detail and be able to segment out and understand exactly what's going on within those verbatims in a way that blends, I guess, all of the best of all of the above, right? That you're blending technology and AI and its ability to tell you sort of what it thinks the most interesting things are. And then the experience of those analysts to come in and scrutinize that and overlay on top of that and say, okay, well, the platform's telling me that this is interesting. Let me deep dive into that. Okay, that is interesting, but for this reason, not the reason that you mentioned, and so on and so forth. And so that's where we are seeing sports organizations want to leverage their text data more and more.
If we could just kind of dig into some of the flaws of the sort of the newer technologies that are coming in and the fact that you can't just rely on them. And you mentioned those four things there that are a bit of an issue. It seems to me that like maybe the biggest one is, like you said, it's a closed book. You can't go back and ask it to check it's working, essentially. Why is that such a problem?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. Ultimately, because people are making really big decisions that either cost an awful lot of money or could potentially cost organizations an awful lot of money or make organizations an awful lot of money. And as a result, understandably, executive leadership teams want to be really sure that they're making the right decision at the right time. And so the classic thing that we get told by sort of a data and analytics team, for example, is that something comes through, let's say it's complaints about, I'm going to say parking. This is a big issue for the teams that we work with over in the States, like, the Falcons in particular. Downtown location, difficult to get to, parking accessibility, transport is a big thing. And so what the executive leadership team want to be able to say is, well, okay, look, parking's always been an issue, but up until this point, we haven't blamed our fan experience scores on that particular thing. Why are you telling us that it's a problem now? And what you need to be able to do then is go back and say, okay, well, here's the data from a year ago and here's the data from now and here's what the differences between those data are. And you just don't get that level of detail out of a ChatGPT or out of a generative AI model. You can upload a load of verbatim and it will say, like, parking is a challenge, but it won't tell you how that differs to previously or what's going on with that. And then also, obviously, once that's been done, it's done and it's not sort of saved or held or housed anywhere. So you don't have the ability to come back to it. So whether you're a data analytics team, a business intelligence team, a fan experience team, when you're going to leadership and you're saying, hey, we want you to make real change, we want you to take action off the back of our fan experience data. As I say, understandably, executive leadership teams want to have real confidence in that. And our experience and what we're being told by our customers is there isn't sufficient confidence in a summary that's been sort of spat out of a generative AI model, because you can't go back and you can't run that sort of second order analysis on it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was kind of interesting to pick up on, and maybe this kind of gets glossed over when it comes to ChatGPT, is that data security element. What are the risks there for people relying on those kind of OpenAI style large language models?
The answer, I guess, is it's hard to know, because it's hard to know how your data is being handled and being used. Look, there have been some updates made around that more recently, but certainly in the early days, if you are uploading lots of data and you're training an AI model based on your data. And so that data is inevitably being leveraged in order to train the model that is being used. So there are going to be sort of security issues around that. And particularly if there's sensitive information within that, then you might not want that to be sort of training a generative AI model. Yeah, as I say, the second thing is that you just don't know. You're uploading a load of data into a black box and then having all of the results come back out of that. If there were to be breaches and security breaches and so on and so forth, there's any manner of things that could happen within that. Because you don't have that visibility, that auditability of knowing exactly where your data's gone and how it's being handled. You sort of don't know what could or might happen with it.
Mm. Why is it so important for sports organisations to understand their data better? What is it that opens up in terms of like making sure that you're doing the right things?
It's all going to sort of boil down to the same thing, right? Which is sell more tickets, sell more merchandise, get more engaged fans. And, fan engagement is such a huge, huge part of the sports world at the moment. Everybody's talking about how you get fans engaged. And again, a lot of the work that we do is over in the US. And you look at the amount of money that's being spent on keeping people out of stadiums. Netflix have just paid $100 and something million to show all of the Christmas Day games in the NFL. You've got what they're calling Spulu, the new big sort of streaming group that's coming together. You've got the amount of money that Tom Brady is being paid to be a lead analyst on Fox and so on and so forth. So you've got these huge, huge international corporations who are spending loads and loads of money on keeping people at home and watching games on their television. And then you've got these enormous stadiums and these massive organizations that are reliant on getting fans into them and enjoying them. And pretty much, again, like all of the organizations that I speak to will draw a link between that fan experience score and ticket revenue, merchandise revenue, season ticket renewals, and so on and so forth. And so understanding what it is that your fans value about coming along to a stadium, about being an Atlanta Falcons fan, being an LA Clippers fan, like understanding what that means to them is really, really important. Going to the game is no longer about watching the game. That historic idea of sort of I go along because I want to watch the game is great, but actually television production is so much better that you probably get a better view of what's happening in the match at home. And so you've got to be offering something different in the stadium. And that really is where understanding that fan experience data is just so important.
Sort of what kind of sports organisations been getting wrong then with that kind of stuff? Like they've been looking at their fan experience scores, they've been analysing it using sort of some of the more old school methods or even using some of the flawed large language model methods. What is it that's sometimes being missed in between those gaps?
I think the biggest misnomer perhaps, and again, something that's very difficult to cut through without some sort of really robust analysis is inevitably, so much of the feedback is about on-field performance. And again, when you speak to people, they'll say, oh, well, we were speaking to one organisation recently, actually, and they said, oh, we don't bother fielding a survey after a loss because all of the feedback is just about the fact that we lost. And this assumption that winning and losing is the reason that people do or don't come to a game. And if they're losing, then people aren't going to come along. And if they're winning, then people are. And again, it's very hard to get to the root cause without having a good way of cutting through all of that noise. Unfortunately, and I'd love to sort of sit here and say something like really cool, the reality is a lot of the stuff is the really boring stuff that people get right. Making sure that queues at concession stands are really, really efficient. Making sure, as I spoke about earlier, that traffic and parking are as efficient as possible. Taking care of fans in the sense of, not gouging people on the price of parking. Because you'll be amazed, the number of people that will spend £100, $100 on attending a game, but then complain about the fact it costs $10 or $20 to park. Where we're seeing ball clubs do really, really well is just saying, okay, well, look, let's do an all-inclusive package, or let's cut down. The Falcons have done a lot of work around reducing the cost of going to the game, not necessarily in terms of ticket prices, but making sure that food prices are kept reasonable, that parking prices are kept reasonable, so that if you do pay however much you're paying to get a game day ticket, you're not then spending a whole load more money to park or to buy food and to all of those sorts of bits and pieces. Another really interesting case study, I think, is the LA Clippers and what they're doing around the Intuit Dome. There's been loads going on around that, and they're really, really focused on fan experience in the Intuit Dome, and it's something we've done a little bit of work with them on as well. But the changes that they've made are sort of making sure that there are plenty of toilets in the new stadium so that when a fan gets up from their seat to go to the bathroom, they're not away for 10, 20 minutes. They're away for 2-3 minutes to go to the bathroom and immediately come back. And it's those sorts of things that I think are really kind of moving the needle. It's the small, boring stuff. It's not the really, really big picture stuff, actually.
Why is it important to find out what fans feel like after a loss? Like, what's it about that moment that like actually is really worth tracking?
There's a lot of honesty, I think, that comes out after it. It's where they're going to be really, really critical of the stadium. They're going to be really, really critical of the experience. And so if you can cut through them saying, sack the coach or whatever else that it is, they'll start to open up about the fact, sort of like, oh, and the toilets weren't clean, and it had run out of toilet paper, and I had to wait, 20 minutes to, get a bottle of water or whatever it happens to be. I think inevitably people are just more honest after the game. And so it's really important to then capture all of those things.
You mentioned a couple of the sports organisations you work with. If you could just kind of walk us through like how you work with the Falcons, like take us through like almost sort of like blow by blow of like what that relationship looked like and how you've sort of worked with their teams internally using your data and got fed back to them and what kind of some of those impacts have been to.
We've been working with them for a good while. Interestingly, we initially started talking to them because they were down a headcount within the fan experience team who own all of that analytics. And they were looking to hire into that gap. And we were able to say to them, well, look, actually, if you're smarter about the way that you run your analysis, actually, maybe you can manage with a slightly leaner team. The way that we work with them is so after every home game, whether it's Atlanta United, the soccer team, or the Atlanta Falcons NFL team, a survey will be fielded, like I described earlier on. Rate various aspects of your experience. I think there are 9 different questions on that. And after every one of those, there is a verbatim open end to sort of describe what's going on. And so we have an automated pipeline set up where that survey data is pulled directly into our platform. Our platform is based on comparison. So we use this unique kind of comparative methodology in order to help you to understand differences between data sets. And so for them, what that will look like is comparing promoters versus detractors on each of those different metrics. You can imagine the things that your promoters are saying are the things that are driving that positive experience, and the things that your detractors are saying are the things that you maybe need to change and do something new and different with. So they might do promoters versus detractors. And then the other thing that they'll do is they'll compare week on week. So what's changed this week versus last week in order to understand sort of, what are the new and emerging themes that are coming through? But the other thing, now that we've been working with them for a while, that they're getting really, really smart with is the ability to then say, okay, those things that last week we were having trouble with, have they gone away? We had a complaint about a bad smell coming from the toilet. Have we now seen a reduction in that number of complaints? Because that's a really, really powerful thing for them to be able to track. That's sort of a real example whereby by doing that over time comparison, they saw one week that they were getting a load of complaints about smell. They weren't sure why. They were able to go in the platform, you're able to localize where those complaints are coming from within the stadium. And so they can say, oh, well, actually, look, there's something going on around this section. And they went in and they found that, that one of the toilets had blocked and was causing this nasty smell. So they're able to then go in and resolve that problem. And then the following week, they can see, okay, that's gone away. And even more powerful than that, what they're also able to do is trace that back to individual records and be able to go back to those fans and say, hi, we're really, really sorry that there was a problem with, the bathrooms where you were sitting. Here's a voucher for next time that you come to the stadium and so on. So it's that ability to really close the feedback loop as well, that now that they're getting really, really advanced in their use of relative insight is sort of incredibly valuable to them. And I suppose the final thing, within our tool, you can develop custom themes. So if there's certain language that you want to keep an eye on, again, whether that's around all of those topics that I've mentioned earlier, you can create those themes and overlay them across all of your investigations, all of your analysis to say, okay, this particular topic that we know that we're very interested in tracking, how does that appear this week versus last week, this season versus last season? And then you can chart those things out on a line graph, all of which, most importantly, perhaps to come back to the point earlier, is very, very easy to communicate. So it's very easy to communicate those kinds of things to your senior leadership to say, okay, well, last week, 50% of all of our mentions made some comment of issues around concession stands, whereas this week it's only 20%. Therefore, we're making positive progress on that front. Or you can say people in the South stand are 4 times more likely to complain about difficulties getting hold of water than people in the other stands. Therefore, we really need to do something about the availability of water within that particular stand itself. And it's those hard metrics that is a far easier for teams to get behind, decision makers to really get behind. Again, to come back to some of the other challenges, it's very difficult to get alignment behind a summary of some verbatim. It's much easier to get that kind of buy-in and that kind of alignment behind a metric, which is, hey, these guys are 4 times more likely to complain about this. And again, having developed and built out their use of the platform, that's sort of a blow by blow of the ways that they're using our tool.
You said that was sort of working with an existing data and analysis team. Do you have to have an existing data analysis team for this to be an effective tool?
No, not necessarily. So the tool is designed in such a way that it can be used. We can train people up to use the tool, and you don't need a data science background at all to be able to do that. We also have in-house analysts. So if it is a case of you wanting to just share your data with us and us to do the analysis for you and provide that report on a week by week or month by month basis, then that's all entirely possible as well. I mean, I can use it, and I'm by no means a sort of tech guy. So yeah.
And when it comes to like turning around those reports, how quickly will teams be able to get that data, be able to access those reports and action them?
The initial analysis happens in seconds when you first upload your data into the tool, and you'll get a breakdown of the metadata and it'll pull out key themes for you immediately. The longer that you want to dig into the data, perhaps the more value you're going to get out of it. But for the most part, you're looking at a couple of hours to run a full, robust analysis of a particular survey. But you'll be able to pull out top themes, as I say, sort of immediately and start to recognize some key parts within minutes, really.
So the Falcons team come in on a Monday after a game on a Sunday, run your data tool, have a report out by the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, well, in the Falcons team, their data will be piped directly into the platform. So by the time they come back in and open up the tool, the data's already there. The comparisons are built and that heartbeat chart's already been updated. So that's already there and immediate. And then they'll probably spend, depending on sort of how rich the data set is, half an hour to an hour looking for anything new and sense checking things. But yeah, definitely sort of within the day, they'll be able to produce that report off the back.
And are the Falcons quite unique in how they use your tool? Like are there others that use it differently?
Within that kind of fan experience use cases is kind of classic within the sports world. We obviously work within other industries to do similar things with CSAT and NPS data. So that kind of core ongoing tracking of, customer, fan, guest satisfaction is a classical use case. The majority of our customers will be using it in that way. There are other people that use the platform in various different ways. So, for example, the Clippers will dive in and they'll want to do some social listening analysis around a particular thing. And so they'll pull a load of social data in and do some upload on that, which is a slightly different way to use the tool. But that kind of uploading an always on satisfaction survey is a pretty classical use case.
And without getting too technical, what's the technology behind it? How does that work?
Without getting too technical. So when you upload a data set into the platform, it's using AI and natural language processing basically to tag out all the data and bucket it. So any one word might be bucketed in 14 different ways based on the type of word that it is. So the grammatical categorization, emotional categorization. So going over and above just standard sentiment analysis, Relative Insight has over 20 different emotions that it'll categorize language into, which is, again, sort of a huge thing for our sports fans, because that very linear, positive, negative, neutral is just a really blunt instrument in language analysis. And then obviously there's 400 different topics that data can be bucketed into, which is where you get your theming from. So once that data is all tagged up and bucketed in that way, and then there are some frequency statistics that are loaded into that, so that you're then able to pull out how frequent a particular topic is or how many people have mentioned a particular topic and so on and so forth. And then, as I say, you've got this comparative methodology. So you're segmenting data within the tool in any way that you want. And then in order to understand what is maybe going on within your season ticket holders, for example, you can deep dive just into that particular segment and start to look at statistically how they differ from, other groups within your tool and so on and so forth. So it's just telling you the truth within your data. It's telling you what themes, emotions, grammatical features are most prevalent within the specific data sets that you're interested in deep diving into.
Since let's go back to the Falcons as an example. Since they started using it, what are some of the wins that they've had off the back of it? I mean, you mentioned fixing a blocked toilet, but I imagine it probably goes a little bit wider than that.
When I speak to the fan experience team there, the big win that they have comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is the ability to have empirical evidence that backs up the recommendations that they're giving. If you speak to the directors of fan experience there, that would be where they really, really have seen value in the past. I used the parking example, and so they were able to kind of lobby locally around sort of traffic and parking in order to get changes made in that area as well. I suppose to measure it out, the biggest win that they had as an organisation was that sort of a year after starting to work with us, they were ranked number one for fan experience across the whole NFL. And that had a huge impact, over the same period. They saw a big boost in their ticket revenues. And, I think it was up to an 11% increase in ticket revenues in that same period. And look, I'd love to sit here and say that that's all thanks to relative insight. I think that would probably be slightly unrealistic of me. But I think that ability to really listen to their fans and build actionable insights off the back of it is certainly something that they credit us with as part of that piece of work.
I mean, I guess that goes to show the importance of having 14 different measurable emotions and all of that kind of thing, right?
Precisely, yeah. And most importantly, the ability to then segment down into that, right? So people are frustrated. Why are they frustrated? Well, let's deep dive into that topic and understand what people are saying over and above just, as I say, the kind of positive, negative, neutral stuff.
So I can figure this out roughly in my head too. So we talked at the top about like a quite basic learning language tool from like well, not basic, but I mean basic in the terms of what we're talking about in ChatGPT. What's the difference that Relative Insight applies that's sort of on top of that?
There's a couple of things. There's the ability to segment and really sort of segment your data out. There's this comparative methodology, which is, as I say, sort of entirely unique to us and to our platform. And then all of the things that come off the back of that comparison. So the ability to generate metrics, the ability to sort of really say, as I was saying earlier on, like, okay, this group are 4 times more likely to talk about this. The ability to say, okay, this percentage of your fan base are mentioning this particular topic. That percentage is either going up or going down. It's those things that are kind of really, really differentiated. And then the other thing is, as I say, the sort of auditability and traceability. So everything that happens in Relative Insight is logged and traced. So you can see exactly how, if somebody wanted to say, show me you're working, you could say, well, look, this is how I've split the data out. This is how I've interrogated the data. This is the results that have come out of this. Those results, those statistical analyses are based on sort of very robust statistical models that exist within the platform. Everything that surfaces different within the platform has a 99% confidence interval associated with it. So you can be really, really sure that the things that you're finding are significant. And then the ability for an analyst, as I say, to sort of overlay on top of that and look at that and say, okay, well, the platform is telling me X, but I'm now reading into the verbatim and the detail of that. And I'm saying, okay, well, this is actually about X plus Y. And that's another thing within the tool, is that you're never more than kind of a couple of clicks away from looking at the actual verbatim comments that have come through. So you're not, again, to come back to kind of a summarization tool where you upload more data than you're likely to be able to read manually. It's giving you a summary. If you then want to understand where that summary's come from, you have to go back to that verbatim data, but you're not able to draw that line immediately, whereas in Relative Insight you are. And then, the data security side of things, we're ISO 27001 certified with, California State Privacy Act and all of those things, sort of, we're compliant with all of those models as well. So you can have real confidence that your data is being handled as securely as possible.
That to me sounds like the two main differences on this. Sort of taking a bigger picture look, right? What is it that you feel like is still not being understood by the sports industry when it comes to this kind of stuff? What's a big blob that we're all not understanding about fan engagement, fan insight, that you guys can really help bridge the gap with?
I think I would say how dynamic it is. I think, again, there's an assumption by organizations that they know their fans and that what their fans are concerned about is fairly static and stable, that it's therefore, okay to do an end of season wrap up or a mid-season, maybe a mid-season and end of season wrap up in order to understand what's going on. Whereas what we find is what is driving those experiences actually varies hugely throughout the season and on a week by week basis. And it's not necessarily big things. Again, the organizations that we'll speak to will say, well, there's no point measuring it on a week by week basis because actually, what are we going to be able to change in that time? Now, if the issue is a blocked toilet, actually quite a lot. And so being able to do that and then being able to demonstrate that you're really listening to fans and valuing the feedback from fans is I think a huge thing. So yeah, I'd say that the biggest, misnomer is that things are static. And by deep diving into the data, you can challenge those assumptions and find the small things that are manageable, that are actionable, that you can do something about on a week-by-week basis that will really, really move the needle.
It sounds like an old school sports mantra, which is like marginal gains to me. Is that pretty much it?
No, it's true, isn't it? I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, it is true. That aggregation of all of those little things that just mean that somebody's experience is X% better, and means that next time they think about buying a ticket, they'll come back and they'll do it. Or when that season ticket renewal email comes around at the end of the year, they're more likely to say yes than no, because over the course of the season, they've seen those marginal changes happening.
I think that's a pretty good place to leave it. Rory, thank you very much for your time.
Perfect. No, thank you for having me.